Welcome to the Establish the Edge podcast. I'm your host, Mike Leone. 2 weeks of DFS in the books. And on today's episode, it's not going to be for everyone. Just want to say that right off the bat. If you're looking for, specific actionable advice for your fantasy teams or how to play DFS, that's not going to be this episode. No fantasy specific takeaways. Instead, and take a little peek inside, the mental health of playing DFS, as well as my thoughts around tilting DFS and how that can be cathartic, but also it can be too much at times. And it was too much for me this past week, despite spending some time just last week rehashing a post that I had made on my Substack from a couple years ago about trying to tilt less in DFS. I literally just reposted that, and then I was really disappointed in the way, mentally I handled this past week of DFS. So I just wanted to talk through that a little bit in case it helps anybody out there who maybe sometimes struggles with the mental side of playing these games where a lot of top heavy prize pools, wild swings, usually things aren't going to go your way. And it's very easy to focus on the negative and not the positive as a result of that. So for me this past week, it was a really unique week for me in terms of building my lineups, where there was so little news and so little change in our projections on the fantasy side and on the ownership side that I built 3 teams for my 3 hand-built contests on Saturday afternoon. I think I shared them in Slack with one of my friends that we work together on building lineups and whatnot. And I sent those Saturday afternoon, didn't make any changes Sunday morning, record the Wake and Rake show. And then after that, kind of looking at ownership, I made one change to 3 of my lineups. I built a lineup for the Thunderdome, a lineup for the 3K luxury box, and a lineup for the 555 milli. I had a Burrow double stack in the Thunderdome. I had a Dak triple stack with a bring back in the 3K, and I went with a Mahomes triple stack with a bring back in the 555. Wasn't going to change any of these. Really liked my mix of players, but for some reason, Sunday morning, I was really thinking, I don't think people want to play Kyren Williams. I really think in these high stakes contests, especially the 3K where people are maybe hand building those a little bit more, maybe not as opto driven, they're going to want to play Jonathan Taylor and not want to play Kyren Williams. So literally the only edit I made from Saturday, like 3 p.m. all the way up till roster lock, was swapping out Jonathan Taylor and the Dolphins defense for Kyren Williams and the Rams defense, hoping that I, read the ownership leads right there and maybe get a single digit owned Kyren, which at that point, I think he's a really good play, even though it's not as fun of a play as JT. So teams were so set that after inactives, I actually got in a home workout in the garage between inactives and the 1 p.m. starts, had my phone by me ready just in case I needed to scurry back up to the computer for any reason. This never happens to me. My wife was completely thrown off because usually I'm like in a manic phase, like simming and re-simming lineups over and over again. Nobody come into my office. Nobody talked to me Sunday mornings, but was pretty relaxed because I was so set, except for that one small tweak that I made. So, of course, we get into the games. Thunderdome teams off to a pretty good start. And then Joe Burrow goes down with injury. I've got the double stack there. And, immediately when something like that happens, you have no chance to win. You're just kind of hoping to claw into a min cash and just cling on there, that sort of thing. And then, the Dallas Giants game gets a little bit nutty there towards the end. And I've got this team in the 3K, and you're wondering probably if you see this on the screen on the YouTube channel why I'm tilting, because this lineup does very well. I finished 5th place overall, but I'm watching this team kind of make this crazy surge up into 3rd place, and I'm pretty stoked. I kind of thought my day was ruined on the Burrow thing. And then late in the afternoon games, I dropped from 3rd to 5th when Jonathan Taylor kind of goes nuts, and I get passed by 2 Jonathan Taylor teams. And at this point, I realized not only have I dropped from 3rd place, 70K payout, to 5th place, 30K payout. I would have won this contest by a few, a handful of points had I stuck with my original lineup of Jonathan Taylor and the Dolphins defense over Kyren Williams and the Rams defense. And that would have been an easier pill to swallow if I had gotten that ownership read right. But was really kind of disappointing. If you see the screen right here, Kyren Williams comes in at 23%, really high. So he doesn't get squeezed. But to add insult to injury, Jonathan Taylor comes in at 6%. And had I known those ownerships would be anywhere close to that, or that was even, a reasonable possibility of happening, there's no way I make that swap. So, you get the worst possible result on a 2v2, and you're completely wrong for the reason that you did it. So it was pretty tough, and I complained incessantly in Slack about it. Thanks to Dink and Brat for dealing with my tilt on Sunday. Probably dampened the mood in there a little bit on what was generally a good day for myself, for subscribers. I know our props really crushed it, and it kind of felt like I was being a big baby despite things going pretty well. It reminded me of a post that Peter Overset made in his P.O. Box newsletter a couple years ago, where he had this battle royale sweat, and he was talking about how painful it was, because he was starting and he kind of wasn't paying attention. And then he logged on and he was in first place or really high up there, and then he didn't have as many players remaining as the other teams in the contest. I'm probably not remembering exactly right, but he gets passed late and still has this great day that normally he would be really, really excited about. But because of kind of the order of events and the mindset that he had going, when he first checked in on that, it ended up being disappointing and having a different feeling. He had even mentioned in the post, like, if the order of the games had been different and he surged from behind and had this really good finish, he would have been so stoked. Or even if you told him before the slate happened, what he would finish, he would have been really happy. And that's the same thing for me. If I actually did get pretty lucky on this slate, despite the focus on that one negative thing, that one what if. Now I held on to 5th place, and that 3K easily could not have. My Burrow team actually did miraculously min cash the Thunderdome, even with the Burrow injury, thanks to a really fortunate run out on the Marquise Brown chalk failing. So I got some very lucky things, and I would have taken this day 10 times out of 10 if you told me it was possible ahead of time. But as Peter kind of wrote, you can see on the screen here, I had one of my best fantasy days ever on Sunday, and yet I spent most of that evening sick to my stomach. And the funny thing, where I really kind of recognize what Peter's talking about, he notes that he had written about tilting on your own terms a few weeks before he made this post, kind of similar to me, literally this past week, rehashing that post about not tilting, kind of having this mindset that I'm going to. And he also wrote in his post, despite that self-awareness, it still took me a couple hours to shake off the disappointment. Even with things going exceptionally well, our dumb lizard brains find a way to ruin the enjoyment. Yeah, I could definitely feel that. I had a very hard time not replaying it in my brain over and over Sunday night. Like, what made you make that switch? Why did you do that? I'm never really that set on teams. And then to just change that one specific thing when I was kind of all set, really wasn't planning on changing anything. And I just got hung up on this one thing. And I don't want to have the wrong takeaway here. Look, I'm a big boy. I'm not going to not make lineup tweaks when I think they're the right lineup tweaks. I can already kind of anticipate people saying, hey, follow your gut, never make those late changes. I don't think that's the lesson that I want to take away here. The lesson is more about how we, digest the actual results of the game, and how we still want to try and put in the best lineups possible. We're going to be wrong sometimes, and we're going to get a really bad result when we're wrong. Sometimes we're going to get lucky and get a good result when we're wrong. Sometimes we're going to be right. Like if I had gotten Kyren Williams at 6% and Jonathan Taylor at 23%, I would have felt better about the process. But honestly, results-wise, it would have ended up even worse, because even more JT teams probably would have passed me. So yeah, I was really hung up on that. My brain just playing over and over again. Not only like, why did I do that, but like, how awesome would it have been, week 2, pay for the whole season of DFS if I just don't make that one small change. But So I didn't handle that well Sunday during the games and was disappointed in that. I did feel like I rebounded well since then. And part of when I had shared, reshared my post on trying not to tilt as much in DFS, I had shared a thread on X from Steve Magnus, who's someone I follow. He's written a couple books that I like. He's a runner, and I really like his work. But he was talking about much bigger picture things about feeling overwhelmed and anxious and what you can do about it, things that are way more important than being disappointed in your DFS day. But I still think it applies. And he kind of wrote, when the world feels angst ridden, a simple playbook: one, curate your inputs; two, move your body; three, take one helpful action; four, connect locally with real people. Your aim isn't to ignore the world, it's to engage with it wisely. When your inputs align with your values, your nervous system steadies and your effort becomes useful. Less outrage, more outcomes. And I tried to, kind of adapt this to my situation. So I took some action, like I updated all my DFS accounting Sunday night, got that out of the way. I went for a long walk to detach, came back, watched a TV show with my wife, some real people, human interaction. And then Mondays, I always try to disconnect a bit. That's sort of my one off day throughout the week. I don't play Monday showdown slates or anything. I disconnect from tech for the most part, try not to check in on Slack that much. I usually go for a trail run in the mornings, pick up my son from school, kind of have a date night with him. And that's really helpful. And just immediately in a way better spot. And you realize to recalibrate, focus on the positive. Just, it was a great DFS day. And, even if it wasn't, things would be fine, but I should be focusing on the good outcomes. And it is kind of a crazy thing that we play because you're trying to win, and almost 99 times out of 100, in these really, even middle-sized tournaments, let alone the really large field tournaments, you're not going to actually win. So there's always going to be something that could have gone better. And it's easy for us to focus on those one or two things that could have gone better instead of all the other things that went right. So yeah, I made that wrong 2v2 swap. But just because my lineup had already been set doesn't mean like I couldn't have originally picked the wrong team that wouldn't have even competed, or that Dallas Giants game gets really fluky at the end and maybe have just a whole hum, not even that good of a day in DFS in general. So very easy to focus on the negative. So you want to recalibrate, focus on the positive. That's one thing I want to do better next time. And something that Andrew Wiggins taught me about back in the daily fantasy boot camp days. Shout out Al Smizzle. I remember him talking about variance in DFS, and he talked about how he was in a live final. I believe it was $1 million to first, and he got passed by a team. Hopefully I remember the story correctly, that had Russell Westbrook, and they had given Russell Westbrook credit for either a rebound or assist that he probably shouldn't have, which gave him a triple-double, and that bonus from the triple-double led that team to passing Wiggins' team for first place. The next day, everything's been paid out. They can't change the contest. The next day, the NBA, if I recall correctly, takes this stat away from Westbrook. So, and that would have meant that Wiggins won the tournament. And I couldn't believe how well he talked about this without any anger or anything. And just knowing that was incredibly unlucky. But think of like all the lucky things that happened for him to even be in that position, and to still have a really, really positive outcome. So I'm trying to think of that. The things that I want to do better next time. So like, obviously I've written about not tilting in DFS in the past and clearly still not doing as good of a job as I would like to with it, given this. So like, what could I, actually do different? I'm thinking of a few things. One is like, we focus a lot on how unlucky we can be. And I sort of think about like, there's a saying like, you don't have to have an opinion. And one of the best ways, you don't always have to share your opinion on things. And one way to not share your opinion is to just decide to not have an opinion on things to start with. If you don't have an opinion, you can't share it. I think about that with luck too. We wouldn't get so caught up on how unlucky we're getting in DFS or whatever it is if we just didn't pay attention to the bad luck to begin with. And that might sound weird, but what I mean is, something like the Joe Burrow injury happens. I don't need to be in Slack tilting like, oh my God, I can't believe Burrow got hurt. Now my Thunderdome team has no chance. Like, obviously, it's not going to be good for my Thunderdome team, but the injury happened. Let's move on. Me lamenting over it isn't going to change it or do anything. And it reminds me a little bit of this Marcus Aurelius quote as well. He says, when you run up against someone else's shamelessness, ask yourself this: is a world without shamelessness possible? No. Then don't ask the impossible. There have to be shameless people in the world. This is one of them. Again, taking things that are more important in the real world, applying them to this DFS area that we know is not that important. But I think that with like injuries in DFS, we know every week players are going to get hurt. So we shouldn't act so surprised when one of those players happens to be in one of our lineups and that happens to have a negative impact on things. Adam Levitan always says, no excuses, play like a champ. And I like his saying. It doesn't mean that unfortunate things didn't occur. It just means we don't have control over them. So don't waste the energy on them. And one of the things I want to do better about is stop thinking about how great it would be to win. Part of the reason I had a hard time letting go of this decision, sort of the way it was made, but also that it was so close to having something so awesome, to get a big DFS win early in the season. Obviously, the money itself is really nice. And you spend the whole DFS day kind of saying like, I want this to happen. I wish this happens. I hope this happens. So I need so-and-so to do that. And I don't know if it's great to do that for 7 hours every Sunday at a time, to be saying, I wish, I want, I hope all these things to happen, when at this point you don't have control over them. You've already made your lineup, and then you're constantly reacting to negative things. And I definitely worry that, as much as this seems like it's inconsequential and, sweating and tilting is part of DFS, it's part of the fun, that there could be some impacts into how this plays into your life elsewhere. What you feed your brain is the patterns it learns to recognize. So if you feed it for 7 hours straight that you need all of these things outside of your control to happen, your brain outside of that time window is also going to start seeing things as to like, oh, I need this to happen. I wish this happened. I lament this, instead of just dealing with things as they come and focusing on what you can actually do to change things, not focusing on good or bad luck. So I hope this episode didn't come off as too preachy. I'm also aware that it might come off really poorly as well as me when I had a very good DFS day. That's kind of the point, though, that I'm trying to make. I'm also not trying to say that you shouldn't tilt or sweat your DFS contest. I will continue to tilt and sweat my DFS contest, just trying to do it in a more healthy way and be a little bit more grounded. I know for a lot of people out there that it can be tough. You only get a few real legitimate sweats every year or every few years. And when they don't go your way, it can be disappointing. But we don't want that disappointment to kind of affect our overall attitude, especially outside of that window on Sunday when we're watching our teams. So with all that said, no more worrying about a bad week 2 swap. We're on to week 3. Anyone who's subscribed to Establish to Run, you can follow my content. We'll be doing the Saturday DFS show for GPPs with Drew Dinkmeyer, Established a Million at 10 a.m. And then Saturday nights, I've been doing a lineup build show. Particularly useful, I hope, for the people that have a subscription over at Solver to the Sims there. I kind of go through half the show looking at the ETR projections, where I think I want to make some adjustments and how I could see things heading. And the other half of the show, taking those opinions and thoughts over to the Solver Sims and seeing what types of lineups I can make. Appreciate everybody who hung in there for this one and for tuning in. Best of luck in week 3 DFS.